Hello, I'm Liz Booth, and thank you for joining me today in the first of my series of WalkIt, TalkIt. Today my guest is Theodora Gianniotis, who is the Director of Built Environmental Heritage Group, and we are going to discuss the constraints and opportunities with heritage property and how to navigate the complexities of purchasing and working with heritage property. Theodora, thank you and welcome to the first series of WalkIt, TalkIt.
Thanks, Liz. Thanks for having me. Great to be here talking about heritage.
So could we start off with, can you just give us a little introduction about yourself? Just let our audience know an overview really on what you do.
Yeah, so my academic background is a Masters of Environmental Law that's focused on heritage. I also have a graduate diploma in heritage studies. My legal background has always been focused on planning, but it has always had a heritage focus. So when I approach property or property law, I always do it with a planning background in order to help clients understand exactly what they're buying, why they're buying, and to understand the constraints and opportunities of what they're buying.
Your expertise is with local, state and national heritage laws and regulations.
That's correct, yeah. So mostly focused on local, though state plays a big role in it. It's very much the bigger national parks that are looking at national heritage, but that, if you think of it as a tiered experience, you start from local, state and then national.
So in terms of when someone wants to purchase a heritage listed property, can you explain just some of the legal implications and requirements associated with owning a heritage property?
So I think one of the main misconceptions is for people to understand the site. So if we're starting from the beginning and someone's buying a heritage property, the first thing they need to know is to have someone look at your planning certificate and understand what exactly you're buying. So is it a local item? Is it a state item? So when a client comes to me and I look at the planning certificate, I see that it's a heritage property. From there, I'll then go into planning portals and I'll have a look what sort of heritage property is. Is it state? Is it local? Is it national? Or whether there is a heritage property nearby or adjacent that also will impact heritage. From there, then I start to look at the actual inventory and the listing of the particular site. And it's from that process we can then start to understand what people can do on that site. You know, what is it that they want to do and what they can't do by understanding the significance and why it's actually listed. Is it a non-heritage item that's in a heritage conservation area? Is it a state listed item that is listed for external and internal and interiors? Or is it a heritage item and it's not just the house that's listed, but it's also the gardens around it? All of these, understanding this significance will impact what you can do and help you understand what you can do on that site, if anything at all.
Sometimes people do forget about gardens and trees coming under heritage.
Yeah, and
easily be overlooked.
It's really a great point that you raise, because we do know a lot of heritage items are on very big sites. And there's a reason they're on big sites, because it's the context from which they're built, and they've got these beautiful gardens that are significant and they're rare. They're rare. So if you're looking at something like building a granny flat on one of these big sites, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means where you put it and how you put it needs to be considered a little bit differently.
And so for me, as a buyer's agent, I reach out to you if a client wants to purchase a property that is heritage listed. And so, you know, I've done this previously with you. We worked together on a project which was amazing. Can you share what steps you take in conducting a due diligence for my clients interested in purchasing a heritage property?
And this is exactly, when you're purchasing a heritage property, it's important to have the right team. So I know when I'm working with a buyer's agent, they've already had a conversation. What do you want from your property? And this is when I'm looking at the significance of a site. You may have already had that conversation that we need to grow into this house. We need to bring elderly parents into this house. If we're then looking at a site that's just restricted, it's on a tight block, there's not going to be an opportunity to grow, and even less so if it's heritage. So when I'm working with a buyer's agent and then going through all the planning portals and all the statements of significance, understanding from you, look, this is what they're looking to do, and future planning their property, then we can have a conversation to really understand this is the property for them, or, you know, there's no use having a 2-bedroom terrace in Glebe if you've got 3 kids, a dog, and you're thinking of bringing your elderly parents in. There's just no room to grow for an ordinary family like that, let alone knowing that, but can't we put an extra story on top? You know, so these are when we're working with a buyer's agent, this is the due diligence that then happens. We have a look, and we look straight away, and I do say this to a lot of my clients with heritage, understanding the constraints of your property gives you the opportunity to grow your property. So in heritage, where you're in a normal site where you're looking at the opportunity, in heritage you first start with the constraints, which then reflects the opportunity that's available.
Yeah, that's I like how your proposition on that, the constraint and opportunity. So again, it's not, you know, don't go to heritage, it's have a look, explore, which, you know, I think a lot of buyers, especially in certain pockets of Sydney, really need to start considering that.
Yeah, and there is those opportunities. The worst outcome for heritage is sites to be abandoned. That's what we don't want.
Yeah.
We want to work with a really good team, really good, architects, and we'll discuss this. But when you're referring a client to me, and we're looking at the conveyance, and you're telling me, look, well, we'll see from the planning certificate that it's heritage. I am then having a conversation with you and the client as to whether this property is for them. And that's it. We shouldn't think, because it's heritage, that restriction is on us. That's for any property. You know, there's no real difference. There are different planning pathways for approval, but that's for any property. So you may be looking at an investment property and you want to put 12 units on there, heritage or not, you're still going to have to ascertain the feasibility of that property.
Exactly.
So it's not, heritage doesn't constrict you from looking at that feasibility. You're just looking at it, I think people are a little bit more scared to look at it, but it doesn't mean the opportunity is not there to look at it.
Yeah. So just a little bit more on the due diligence process. How do you navigate potential legal challenges related to heritage restrictions?
Legal challenges in planning are something that, unfortunately or fortunately, are there. It's the rigour of what we have in our planning laws that we're able to have a court dedicated to planning. And that's actually quite rare around the world. Australia was one of the first places that ever instigated this. Planning regulations or taking something to court, it's part of the planning process. It doesn't mean that every matter is going to go to court, and it doesn't mean that every heritage matter goes to court. What like I said, the previous example, you might want to put, there's things that go to court for height restrictions, there's things that go to court for privacy restrictions, there's most things that go to court are for floor space ratio, so heritage is one of those elements that it could go to court on. So you're not looking at, I've got a heritage item and the only way I'm going to develop it is I'm going to go to court. And what I can say is that having the right team from the beginning, from when you buy it and you've spoken to your buyer's agent, you've looked at the contract, you've understood the constraints, and then from there you've got your team that's going to put you in contact with a really great architect with a really good design, you're more likely you're going to have better conversations with council. And I have seen where people have come to me and said, look, I just can't get this through council, and I said, can I see your heritage report? And they give me this 2-page heritage report, and I was like, okay, well, here's the problem straight up, because you've not looked at the significance of the site. Heritage impact statements, which you must do for any development of a heritage item or an item in a heritage conservation area or a state significant item, is looking at what is the impact of this design on, if it's a heritage conservation area, the public domain. If it's a heritage item, is it looking at impacting on the significance of the heritage, or is it actually highlighting the significance? And that's what a good architect would do. So having a good team from the start, I can't sit here and say, you know, you're definitely not going to go to court, or you definitely are going to go to court. But it's not more or less the Land Environment Court doesn't just have heritage matters. They've got a lot of planning matters.
For sure.
Yeah. So again, different planning approvals, but the difference is with heritage, you need to have the right team from the start, and having a heritage expert and understanding a property is really key to that.
It comes back to your constraint, opportunity,
constraints, and that's the due diligence, Liz, that we're talking about from the start. If you're thinking, again, you know, you're buying a small terrace in Redfern or something, and you've got a desire to do a Hampton style house, it's not going to happen, and it's never going to happen, and I hope it would never happen. And you need to look for another site if that's what you want. If you want a 6 rambling house, it's not the site for you, and that's that's what's more important. So it's less about understanding the law and more about understanding the site. Yes, you know, there's matters that do go to court. I'm not going to say they're not. That's why we've got the Land Environment Court, and that's why we have it, for the rigours of planning. So things are challenged, and we don't just have, you know, terrible designs. You know, we have worked hard in New South Wales for our planning and heritage laws. They're very unique to us, and we should be very proud and protective of them. So, though, you know, the reason they're there is more for protecting our past for our future.
So Theodora, if I've got a buyer, let's just do a hypothetical here. I've got a buyer who's fallen in love with a heritage listed property, and the bathrooms are run down, the kitchen's run down. How do I navigate, you know, that whole process with my buyer, so that they could move forward and buy it and do the required works?
So that's because heritage houses are old by nature, right? Or else they wouldn't be heritage. So they're going to be run down. They've probably had a lot of work that are ad hoc add-ons here, there and everywhere that are not significant to the property at all. Depending how much they want to do, it would most likely require a DA because it is a heritage property. But there are also pathway opportunities for exemptions at many councils. So if you've got an old shingle roof and it's same for same, shingle to shingle, and you need to replace it, then it well may be it comes under an exemption. You know, if you're looking at, you know, bathroom renovations, again, what is a property listed for? If it's a state significant property and it's listed in and out, and these are so just very quickly recapping. So if it's a state listed property, we do what we call a Section 60 double approval process. So it doesn't only just go through local government, it also goes through the Office of Environment and Heritage. So it needs a double approval process. If it's local, it just goes through council. Okay. So depending what it's listed for, there are opportunities for smaller renovations that they shouldn't fear. And also, you know, the bigger renovations, if it's contained within the property, you know, obviously the approval will be less contentious.
Can I just ask you, what kind of time frames are we looking at on those approvals, or is that a how long's a piece of string question?
That is a how long is a piece of string, and how big are the changes that you're making.
Right.
Okay. So sometimes I advise clients, and again, I can come in before they purchase and we can have a quick conversation, you know, so they're comfortable. And back to where we started, what are they, you know, what are they looking to do? Do they just want to add bedrooms for the sake of adding bedrooms? Because some of these heritage houses already have 6 or 7 bedrooms in there.
Yeah, sure.
You know, is it a safety issue? Some of the railings on the stairs are really not to Australian standard, you know, safety standard. So things need to be changed. So all of these will need to be looked at.
Can we just go back to constraints and opportunities? So how do you collaborate with other professionals such as architects, historians, preservation experts in handling heritage cases?
So this is where heritage is actually very exciting, because though it feels like a wet blanket when you talk about the constraints, what that forces is really good design. It forces an architect to look at the opportunities, and there are some incredible examples of where architects have designed within the constraints and produced really fantastic designs in heritage. And we see this beautiful layering of history, because one thing heritage is not is static, and it's got layers of history, and it is our legacy to continue those layers. And having great architectural design is fantastic for a heritage property, because it does highlight the past, but it also interprets, it gives an opportunity to interpret. So also working with historians, and I've had a great example of something I've worked on in a particular area. We can work with historians, local history groups, to actually tell a story by way of interpretive devices. So they can either be storyboards, or on this particular site we also use the foundation stones, and we had copper dates on those. They were put in the garden. So these are all lighting can work with interpretive designs. So we can work with a lighting team to highlight beautiful brickwork. So where we start with a constraint on a heritage property, it forces us to really look at it differently and come up with incredible designs. We'll work with people in woodworking, if we've got old stairs, to bring those stairs back to life, or wood, so, and then even just exploring the story of who lived there, why they lived there, beautiful stories of people that have created gardens, where their influence was. And I find then that clients then actually want to keep those stories within the house, so either by way of their own, pieces, they interpret it within the design.